A freezing canine bursts out of the blizzard, desperate, shaking so hard its tags rattle. A retired Navy SEAL spots the dog limping through the snow and makes one choice that will change everything. He follows the canine into the dark winter forest, expecting nothing in return, just a simple act of mercy. But what he finds hidden in an icy rock crevasse shocks everyone: a missing female police officer, unconscious and bleeding. Why would criminals chase a cop into a snowstorm? And what happens when the SEAL realizes the canine wasn't running from danger? It was leading him straight into it? The truth behind the hunt is darker than anyone imagined. Don't miss this heart-wrenching story of courage, loyalty, redemption, and a bond forged in the cold that will defy every expectation. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The black pine forest vanished under a whiteout. Wind worried the pines like angry spirits, and snow came sideways, erasing roads, tracks, and time. Mason Cole lived where the map stopped, in a one-room cabin that smelled of split cedar and old coffee, the kind of place you chose when you wanted silence to drown out memory. He was a retired Navy SEAL with the posture of a man still listening for footsteps. Tall and broad-shouldered, about 40, with weathered white skin that stayed wind-burned all winter, a square jaw shadowed by rough stubble, and short dark hair threaded with early gray at the temples. His eyes were the unsettling kind, calm on the surface, deep underneath, like a lake that had swallowed too many storms. He wore the same armor every day, a worn brown leather jacket with cracked elbows over a red and black plaid shirt, as if cloth could serve as a promise. Don't fall apart. People in town said Mason was polite but distant, the sort who held doors open yet never stayed for small talk, who nodded to strangers like they were passing ghosts. The truth was simpler and sadder. Something had happened years ago, one of those nights where radio screamed, the air smelled like burning plastic, and a friend's voice cut off mid-sentence. Mason had returned home with medals and a hollow spot behind his ribs where laughter used to live. Out here, the wind was loud enough to argue with his thoughts, and the wood stove could be trusted in ways people sometimes couldn't. Tonight the stove popped and hissed, a small dragon trapped in iron. Mason fed it another log and watched the flame catch like courage, bright for a second, then steady. He tried to keep his mind on practical things. The stack of firewood against the wall, the way the kettle trembled on the grate, the emergency lantern he kept by the door. He'd learned to live by routines the way sailors learned by tides, because routines didn't ask questions. Still, the storm kept talking. The cabin creaked as if it was old enough to complain. The trees outside groaned like giants rolling in their sleep. Somewhere beyond the window, the world tried to disappear. Mason sat at the small table and wrapped his hands around a chipped mug. The coffee inside was too strong and too bitter, but bitterness was honest. "Congratulations," he muttered to himself, dry humor aimed like a dart at his own chest. "You moved to the woods for peace, and the gods sent you a blizzard." He tried reading, some paperback left behind by a hunter, the pages smelling faintly of tobacco, but the words wouldn't stay still. His attention kept drifting to the door, to the thin line of light at its base, to the idea that the storm might decide it wanted company. It wasn't fear exactly. It was vigilance, the old reflex that never fully retired. Mason told himself he was being ridiculous. Out here, the only visitors were deer, the occasional reckless tourist, and loneliness. The clock ticked. The wind answered. Then the sound came. Sharp, deliberate, wrong. Not the rattle of a branch, not the shove of drifting snow. A knock. Mason froze so completely he could hear his own heartbeat, a steady drum that sounded too loud in a cabin meant for quiet. Another knock followed, not impatient, but urgent, like a message delivered by trembling hands. For a brief moment he didn't move. His mind sprinted through possibilities the way it always did. Tree falling? Traveler? Hallucination? The last one stung. He hated how easily his brain offered it, as if trauma could be filed under weather. The knock came again, softer now, as though the visitor's strength was draining into the night. Mason stood, joints protesting, and crossed to the door. He didn't grab the shotgun hanging above the mantel. He was many things, but not the kind of man who wanted to meet the world with a muzzle first. Instead, he took the lantern and clicked it on. Warm light bloomed, gold against the cabin's brown wood. He slid the bolt back. The door opened into a wall of snow. Wind slapped his face like an accusation. For a second he saw nothing but swirling white. Then a shape lurched forward and nearly collapsed on his threshold. A dog! Not a stray mutt with a hopeful grin, not a neighbor's lab that wandered off chasing squirrels. This was a working dog, the kind built like a coiled spring, lean, muscular, all-purpose. The animal's coat was a dark sable black with tan along the legs and muzzle, the fur thick but crusted with ice. Its ears stood half-raised, one nicked as if it had been torn long ago, and its eyes, dark amber, burned with intelligence and panic. The dog wore a canine harness, black nylon with reflective strips, one strap ripped and flapping. A metal tag clinked as it trembled, and the sound was heartbreakingly small compared to the storm. Blood marked one front paw, a thin bright line against white snow. The dog was shivering hard, not the theatrical shiver of a creature begging for sympathy, but the involuntary quake of a body fighting to stay alive. It didn't bark. It didn't whine for food. It stared at Mason with the fierce focus of an arrow pointed at its target, as if the dog had spent its last ounce of willpower to find this door, this light, this man. Mason's throat tightened. He'd seen that look before, in young recruits who tried not to show fear, in civilians trapped under rubble, in himself in a mirror after a night of bad dreams. "Hey," he said softly, the word coming out rough, like it hadn't been used in a while. He lowered himself into a crouch to look less like a threat, keeping his hands visible and calm. The dog's nose twitched, catching the scent of smoke, coffee, and human. It didn't back away. It didn't lunge. It stayed, trembling, as if the doorway itself was the only safe border left in the world. Mason noticed the dog's age in small details, the maturity in its gaze, the way its stance, though weakened, still carried training. Not a puppy, not old, maybe 4 years, 5 at most. Prime working age, and yet there were faint scars under the fur at the shoulder, pale lines that suggested past injuries, the kind you didn't get from playing fetch. Mason swallowed, anger and pity tangling together. He reached out slowly, palm down, letting the dog choose. The dog flinched at first, just a twitch, but then leaned forward an inch and sniffed his glove. The breath that came from its nose was hot, sharp, urgent. Its eyes flicked past Mason into the cabin, then back to him, then toward the storm, like a compass trying to point at tragedy. "You're not here for my hospitality," Mason murmured, a humorless half-smile tugging at his mouth. "Yeah, I get it." He eased the dog inside with a gentle gesture. The dog stepped onto the wooden floor and paused, as if unsure whether warmth was a trick. Mason shut the door against the wind, and the sudden quiet felt like stepping underwater. The dog shook once, ice crystals scattering like broken glass, then stood rigid, listening. Mason set the lantern down and grabbed an old towel from a peg. He moved with deliberate slowness, talking the way handlers talk to frightened creatures, the way medics talk to wounded soldiers, a steady voice, a promise made out loud. "Easy, you're okay. Nobody's going to hurt you in here." The dog's gaze followed his mouth as if the tone mattered as much as the words. Mason knelt and dabbed the bloody paw. The dog tensed, a low rumble vibrating in its chest, not a threat, more like a reflex that had been drilled into it by harsh lessons. Mason stopped instantly, lifting both hands. "All right," he said, gentle but firm. "No touching. Message received." He let the towel fall open on the floor instead, an invitation. The dog didn't step onto it. It stood, tremors running through its frame, and then, like a thought turning into motion, it pivoted toward the door again, not to leave, to insist. The dog looked back at Mason, eyes wide, and in that glance was a whole sentence. "Come, now. Someone's dying." Mason's chest tightened in a way that felt both familiar and unfair. He'd worked hard to build a life where emergencies belonged to other people. But fate had a crude sense of humor. It didn't care what you wanted. It cared what you were. And Mason, no matter how deep he hid in the woods, was still a man trained to answer alarms. He stood, grabbed his heavy boots, and pulled them on fast. He shrugged into the worn brown leather jacket, the red and black plaid beneath it like a flag he couldn't lower. He snatched a length of rope from a hook, clipped a flashlight to his belt, and took one last look at the warm stove as if asking permission to leave safety behind. The dog, Titan, the name stamped on a small patch sewn to the harness, paced once, nails clicking on wood, then steadied, waiting for Mason's decision, like a judge waiting for a verdict. Mason huffed a breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "All right, Titan," he said, voice dry with resignation and something else, something dangerously close to hope. "You win. I'll play hero tonight." Titan's ears pricked as if it understood the joke, or at least the intent. Mason opened the door and the blizzard grabbed them both. Titan leapt into the white, sure as a compass, and Mason followed, stepping off his threshold and back into a world that didn't forgive mistakes. The cabin's warmth vanished behind them. Ahead, the forest swallowed light. Titan ran, looking back only once to make sure the man was still coming, and Mason ran after, heart pounding because some knocks were not requests, they were summons. Hours earlier, before Titan ever found Mason's lantern-lit door, the black pine forest had already decided to swallow a secret. The blizzard didn't fall politely. It attacked, snow thrown sideways like sand in a battlefield, wind howling through the pines with a voice that sounded almost pleased to erase footprints. Brooke Hayes ran through that white violence with the stubbornness of a woman who refused to be written as a headline. She was a city cop stationed in a rural county, early 30s, athletic and compact, with pale skin gone red from cold, a sharp nose, and dark brown hair yanked into a low bun that was coming loose, strand by strand. Her eyes were a storm gray that didn't ask permission to stare people down, and tonight those eyes were wide for a different reason, survival. She had the kind of face that looked calm even when her pulse was racing, the kind that made suspects underestimate her until the cuffs clicked. Brooke's temperament had been forged by a simple, ugly memory. Years ago, as a rookie, she'd watched a colleague wave off a domestic call as not worth the paperwork, and the next morning a woman was found dead. Brooke never waved things off again. She kept her morals in her front pocket like a badge you couldn't steal, and that made her inconvenient in a county where everyone was related, everyone owed someone a favor, and certain barns were none of your business. Tonight had been business. She'd been investigating a string of animal thefts and disappearances that didn't fit the usual pattern. Too organized, too quiet, too much money moving for just dogs. It began with an anonymous tip scribbled on a napkin left in her mailbox. No name, only coordinates and 2 words: Fight Pit. Brooke didn't trust anonymous tips, but she trusted the tremor in the handwriting. She'd taken Titan with her because Titan was more than a canine partner. He was her anchor, her witness, her protection in a world that loved to call women too emotional until those women were bleeding. Titan was 5 years old, a Belgian Malinois with a dark sable coat that turned almost black along his spine, lean and long-legged, built for speed and sudden turns. His ears were sharp triangles that never stopped listening. His eyes were amber and unnervingly human, not in a cute way, but in a "this animal is thinking" way. Titan's personality was disciplined without being cold. He was affectionate in private, leaning into Brooke's knee when she sat too still, pressing a toy into her lap like a reminder to breathe. But on duty, he became a blade, all focus, all purpose. Brooke sometimes joked he had better self-control than most men at the diner. She laughed, but it was true. She'd followed the tip to the outskirts where the forest thickened and the roads turned to gravel and lies. There was a run-down property half hidden by trees, a low building with no sign, no lights, and a back entrance worn by too many boots. Brooke had parked far off and moved in on foot, Titan close and silent. She'd heard it before she saw anything. Not barking, not playful yelps, but the muffled, choked sounds of animals under stress. The kind of noise that made your stomach turn because you recognized pain even when it was contained. Brooke's jaw clenched hard enough to ache. She'd crouched at a window, used her phone camera to record what she could through a crack. Inside, men moved around a crude ring area. There were cages. There were shadows of dogs pacing in circles too tight to be hope. Brooke's breath fogged the glass, and she swore silently, not at the storm, but at humans. Titan's hackles rose, a low growl trapped deep in his chest, and Brooke had placed 2 fingers on his collar. Her signal, hold. She'd gotten enough. Faces, plates, a ledger on a table, a glimpse of a man with broad shoulders and a predatory stance. Derek Vance. Brooke knew Derek's name the way you knew the name of a bad weather system. Everybody pretended not to, but everyone did. Derek was mid-40s, tall, thick-necked, with a shaved head that gleamed under yellow light and a mouth that looked carved for sneering. He dressed like he wanted to be mistaken for just a working guy. Work boots, heavy jacket, gloves, but the way he moved gave him away. He didn't fidget. He didn't check over his shoulder. Men who feel accountable do those things. Derek moved like a man used to being obeyed. Brooke's plan had been simple: retreat, transmit what she could, come back with warrants. But plans were for normal nights. This was a night where the storm wanted blood and Derek wanted silence. As she and Titan slipped away, the wind shifted, and Titan's paw hit a buried chunk of ice. It cracked. A tiny sound. In a blizzard, a crack should have died instantly, but the property's back door opened, and a beam of light swung through the trees with the searching impatience of a predator's eye. Someone had heard, or someone had been watching. Brooke's pulse spiked, but her face stayed locked into control. She clicked her radio. Static. The storm ate signals like a hungry god. Titan looked up at her, reading her body language the way only dogs and soldiers can. Brooke didn't speak. She didn't need to. She tightened her grip on her phone, tucked it inside her jacket, and ran. The forest turned into a labyrinth of white and black, white snow, black trunks, and the gray in between where depth perception died. Behind her, voices carried in bursts, distorted by wind. Flashlights pierced the snow in furious sweeps. Brooke heard the crunch of boots closing the distance. Titan stayed on her left flank, moving with her rhythm, matching her speed, his breathing controlled despite the cold. Every few seconds he glanced back, not afraid, just calculating. Brooke's lungs burned. Her fingers were numb, but she refused to drop the phone. It was evidence. It was leverage. It was the difference between justice and a shrug. "Police!" she shouted once, the word ripped away by wind. She wasn't calling for them to stop. She was calling for the forest to witness. She cut between 2 pines, ducked under a branch heavy with snow, and felt icy needles slap her face. Something struck a tree behind her. Maybe a thrown rock, maybe a warning shot swallowed by storm. The sound didn't register cleanly, only as vibration. Brooke's mind ran in a brutal, efficient line. If they catch me, they take the phone. If they take the phone, they keep hurting animals. If they keep hurting animals, they keep hurting people too, because men who enjoy cruelty don't limit themselves forever. Titan's harness snagged on a low limb. For a fraction of a second he slowed. Brooke's heart lurched. She yanked him free with a quick motion and whispered, "Good boy." Not as praise, but as a promise. "I'm still here." The flashlight beams behind them multiplied. Brooke could hear Derek now, his voice distinct even through the wind, a steady, annoyed command. "Don't let her out. Get the dog." The dog. Not Titan, not canine, not partner. The dog. Brooke's rage flared hot enough to give her strength. She veered toward a rocky section of forest where the ground rose and the trees thinned. She'd hiked these trails in calmer seasons, had mapped them in her mind, the way a swimmer memorized currents. Somewhere ahead was a narrow ravine and a natural rock shelf. If she could get down into it, she could break line of sight. She pushed harder, boots sliding, knees stinging from the cold. Titan surged ahead, then circled back, checking her pace, urging her forward like a shepherd guiding a wounded lamb. Brooke almost laughed at the image. She, the cop, being herded by her own dog. Dark humor was her body's way of refusing to panic. The ravine appeared like a shadow in the snow. Brooke saw a flat stretch that looked solid, a white bridge between two rocks. In summer it would have been obvious, an opening, a crack. In winter the blizzard had dressed it up like safe ground. Brooke's training screamed at her to test footing, to slow down, to probe with a stick. But behind her the lights were close enough to paint the snow around her boots. Titan barked once, sharp and urgent, as if trying to warn her. Brooke's brain registered the warning a half-second too late. Her right foot landed. The snow gave way with a sickening softness, like stepping on rotten wood. Brooke's stomach dropped. The world tilted. Her arms flailed, fingers clawing at air. Titan lunged toward her, jaws snapping at her sleeve, but his teeth caught only fabric as Brooke plunged down. She hit the rock side of the crevasse hard, shoulder first, then ribs, pain exploding bright and immediate. Her helmet clipped stone. Stars burst across her vision. She tasted blood, metallic and warm, absurd in the cold. Her body slid another foot, then stopped on a narrow ledge, wedged between rock and snow. Above, the opening was a jagged mouth, already being dusted over by the storm as if the forest was trying to hide its own mistake. Brooke gasped, but the air in the crevasse was colder, denser, like breathing inside a freezer. She tried to move her right arm and nearly screamed. Something was wrong, dislocated or fractured. Her ribs felt like cracked glass. Titan's face appeared above, eyes wild, ears flattened by wind. He whined, a sound of pure anguish that made Brooke's throat tighten. "Titan," she rasped, voice thin. She tried to reach up with her left hand, but her fingers met rock. She couldn't climb, not with that shoulder, not in that ice. Not now. Above, the flashlights arrived. Beams stabbed down into the opening, jittery and impatient. Brooke pressed herself deeper into the ledge, every movement a fresh bite of pain. Titan shifted, torn between staying with her and staying alive. Brooke's mind went to him instantly. If they caught Titan, they'd use him, hurt him, break him to punish her. She forced herself to focus despite the haze creeping in. "Go," she whispered, lips barely forming the word. Titan's head jerked as if he understood and hated it. Brooke's eyes burned. "Go get help." The sentence was more breath than sound. She didn't know if he heard. She just needed it to be true. The men above shouted to each other, their words muffled. One light swept across the crevasse and missed her by inches. Brooke held her breath, praying to whatever gods listened in winter. A beam caught Titan. For a second the dog was visible, dark shape against white. Someone cursed. A flashlight chased him. Titan made a choice that was both instinct and loyalty. He darted away from the opening, leading them off, giving Brooke the only gift that mattered, time. Brooke's vision blurred. The pain in her shoulder pulsed with her heartbeat. Cold seeped into her clothing, into her bones, into her thoughts. She clutched her phone to her chest like a talisman. The storm above raged, but down here, inside the crevasse, there was a terrible quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of being buried without dirt. Brooke tried to keep herself awake by naming details, tree species, street names, Titan's birthday month, anything. Her eyelids grew heavy anyway, dragged down by shock and exhaustion. The last thing she saw was snow drifting into the opening like soft feathers, sealing her in. Her last coherent thought wasn't about fear. It was about Titan's paws running through the storm, and the stubborn hope that somewhere in this forest there was a door with light underneath it. Then darkness took her, and the crevasse kept her secret. Titan ran like a compass that had decided north was no longer a direction, but a person. The blizzard tried to swallow him, snow striking his face, wind clawing at his ribs, yet he cut through it with the single-minded ferocity of a dog who had been trained to find the lost. Mason Cole followed, boots punching into drifts, breath tearing at his throat. The forest around them was a myth turned hostile, black pines towering like cathedral pillars, their branches bending under the weight of ice, the world reduced to a tunnel of swirling white and the rhythmic thud of Mason's heart. He kept the rope coiled over one shoulder and the flashlight clenched in his gloved hand, its beam a weak golden spear that the storm kept trying to snap. His worn brown leather jacket creaked at the seams each time he moved, the red and black plaid beneath it darkened with wind-driven snow. Mason did not pray, not the way other men did, but he found himself bargaining with the universe anyway. Just let her be alive. Let this not be another body I can't carry home. Titan slowed suddenly, skidding sideways, and Mason nearly collided with him. The dog's ears snapped forward, his body locking into a rigid, alert stance. He wasn't looking at the trees. He was looking at the ground. The snow here was wrong. It didn't lay the way it should. It was smoother, a pale sheet with no texture like a fresh grave. Mason's training surfaced, sharp as a blade. An opening, a void, a trap. Titan paced the perimeter, whining once, pawing at the edge as if trying to peel the world back. Mason crouched and shone his light across the surface. He saw scuffed snow and faint depressions, footprints half erased by the storm, leading toward the pale sheet, then vanishing. Nearby, a smear of darker snow marked where someone had slid. A smell cut through the cold when the wind turned, blood, metallic and thin. Mason's jaw clenched. "Okay," he said, voice tight. "Okay, I see it." He jabbed the shovel handle into the snow with a cautious push. The surface gave slightly, hollow beneath, and Mason felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature, a crevasse, a crack in the rock hidden by winter's deceit. Titan let out a low sound that wasn't quite a bark, not quite a whine, more like a plea, as if the dog's heart was trying to speak through his throat. Mason looked around for an anchor point and found a thick pine close enough, its trunk wide and scarred with old lightning marks. He wrapped the rope around it twice, tied a knot his hands remembered even when his mind wanted to forget, and tested it with his weight. The rope held, the pine held. Mason exhaled. "Stay," he told Titan, not harshly, but with the calm authority of a man who once commanded chaos. Titan trembled, wanting to disobey, but he understood the tone. He sat, then rose again immediately, unable to truly settle. His amber eyes never left Mason's face. "I'm coming back up," Mason added, as if making a promise to the dog would make it real. He lowered himself onto his stomach and scraped away snow at the edge with the shovel, widening the opening until the rock mouth showed itself. Cold air breathed up from the crevasse like the exhale of something ancient. Mason clicked his flashlight to a brighter setting and angled the beam down. The light slid over jagged stone walls, then caught a patch of fabric, dark against gray rock. His pulse jumped. "Hey!" Mason shouted, voice swallowed by wind. "Can you hear me?" No answer, only the blizzard's roar above and a faint, horrible stillness below. He clipped the rope around his waist, braced his boots, and began to descend, feet searching for holds. The rock was slick with ice. His gloves scraped, fingers burning despite insulation. He moved with measured care. Too fast meant slipping. Too slow meant freezing. Halfway down, the beam of his flashlight landed fully on her. Brooke Hayes lay on a narrow ledge, curled slightly as if trying to protect her ribs. Snow dusted her hair and eyelashes. Her skin, pale under the grime, had a bluish cast at the lips. One arm was pinned awkwardly under her, her shoulder at an angle that made Mason's stomach tighten. There was blood at her temple, not a gushing wound, but enough to paint a thin line down her cheek. She looked like a woman the mountain had tried to keep. Mason's throat closed. For a second he saw not Brooke, but another body, another winter, another mission, another face he'd promised he would not forget. The memory came like a wave. Mason swallowed it down like he'd swallowed so many things. "Ma'am?" he said, softer now, more human. "Hey, I'm here." He reached the ledge, knelt, and checked her airway, his breath coming in harsh bursts. Her chest rose faintly. Not good, not hopeless. Her pulse was thready, but present under his fingers at her neck. Titan's whine echoed from above, faint but insistent, like a siren with a broken speaker. "She's alive," Mason called up, not sure if the dog understood words or only the relief in them. Titan answered with a sharp bark that sounded like thank you. Mason shifted his flashlight and took in the rest. The ledge was narrow, the drop beneath it disappearing into darkness. Getting her out would be a fight with physics and the storm. He assessed her injuries fast, the way medics did when time was a currency. Head wound, possible concussion. Shoulder likely dislocated, maybe fractured. Ribs bruised or cracked. Hypothermia, creeping in like a thief. He couldn't treat everything down here. He could only move her. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a small emergency blanket, thin, reflective material that crinkled like foil. He draped it over her torso, tucking it around her as best he could, without jostling the bad shoulder. Then he unhooked a strap from his pack and made a makeshift sling across her chest to stabilize her arm. Brooke stirred when he touched her, a weak sound escaping her throat. Her eyelids fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening slightly as her eyes found his face. In the flashlight glow, her storm-gray eyes looked almost silver. She blinked, and tears that might have been pain or cold gathered at the corners. "Titan," she rasped, voice shredded. He got me," Mason said. "He's up there. He's a damn hero." Brooke's mouth twitched, something like a smile trying to survive. Mason expected panic or confusion, but what he saw in her expression was determination. Battered, but intact. Even half frozen in a crevasse, she carried herself like someone who refused to surrender. She tried to move, and her breath hitched. Pain. Mason held her steady. "Don't," he warned gently. "I've got you." Her gaze flicked past him, as if she could see through rock, through snow, through men with flashlights. She started, then coughed, the sound wet and sharp. "They were chasing." Mason's eyes hardened. "I figured." He adjusted the rope and positioned himself to lift her. Brooke's body was lighter than it should have been, the weight of cold stealing strength and mass in ways that felt wrong. He slid an arm under her knees and another behind her back, careful around the injured shoulder, and stood with a grunt that he tried not to let sound like fear. The ledge was slick. His boot slipped a fraction, and for a moment the world tilted. Titan barked above, frantic. Mason's muscles locked. He found his footing again, breath shaking. "Not today," he muttered, half to himself, half to the mountain. He secured Brooke against his chest, her head lolling briefly until she forced it upright, stubborn even in weakness. "Can you hold on?" he asked. Brooke's fingers, numb, trembling, clutched at his jacket. The worn leather squeaked. "Yeah," she whispered, though it sounded like a lie told for courage. Mason began the ascent, pulling with his arms, bracing with his legs, the rope biting at his waist. Each movement was a slow negotiation with gravity. Snow fell into the crevasse from above, stinging his face and melting against his skin before freezing again. Brooke's breath warmed the front of his jacket in small, damp puffs. He focused on the next hold, then the next, refusing to look down into the dark. Halfway up, Brooke's head rolled against his shoulder. Her eyelashes were clumped with ice. "Stay with me," Mason said, the command rougher than he intended. Brooke's eyes fluttered. She tried to speak and failed. He didn't want to admit how much that terrified him. He'd been brave in firefights, steady under explosions, but this? Carrying a living person out of a hole while winter tried to bury them. This felt like fighting a god. At the lip of the crevasse, Titan lunged forward, teeth catching the edge of Brooke's sleeve, not pulling her, not hurting her, just anchoring, participating, refusing to be a spectator. Mason grunted and used the dog's momentum and his own to slide Brooke onto solid ground. Titan immediately pressed his body against Brooke's side, sharing warmth, whining softly. His tail wagged once, then stilled, as if he didn't dare waste energy on joy yet. Mason collapsed to one knee, chest heaving. The storm hit them full force again. He shielded Brooke with his body, scanning the trees. Even with visibility near zero, his instinct screamed that they were not alone. Tracks. Voices earlier, men who had been close enough to force her into this trap. If those men were still out there, Mason had just lit a lantern in their dark. Brooke coughed again, then forced her eyes open. She stared at Mason with a kind of fierce urgency, as if she could will herself into strength by refusing to blink. Her lips were cracked and blue, but her voice came out clear enough to chill him. "Don't," she said, a single word heavy with warning. Mason leaned closer to hear. Brooke swallowed, her throat working against pain. "Don't take me to town." Mason's brow furrowed. "Why?" Titan growled low at the word town, as if he understood it as danger. Brooke's gaze darted toward the direction of the county road, though it was invisible behind snow. "Because," she whispered, and her eyes, those storm-gray eyes, held something darker than fear. "The wrong people are waiting there." Mason's jaw tightened until it hurt. He looked at the forest, at the blizzard, at the dog pressed to Brooke like a guardian angel with teeth. He had hoped this rescue would end with warmth and a phone call. Instead, it opened like a door to something worse. Mason slid an arm under Brooke and lifted her again, bracing her carefully. Titan moved to the front, leading back the way they had come, head low, senses sharp. Mason followed, carrying Brooke through the whiteout toward his cabin, knowing that in the span of minutes his quiet life had been rewritten. Behind them, the wind erased their tracks. Ahead, the storm hid their salvation. And somewhere in the trees, unseen eyes might already be adjusting to the dark. The cabin greeted them like a reluctant sanctuary, warmth leaking from the cracks, a single amber window in a world that had turned to white violence. Mason Cole shouldered the door open with his hip, one arm locked around Brooke Hayes's back and knees, the other gripping the flashlight that trembled with his breath. Titan slipped in first, low and fast, paws silent on the wooden floor, despite the ice crusted into his fur. The dog's head snapped left, right, then toward the window, scanning as if the storm itself might grow teeth. Mason kicked the door shut and threw the bolt with a practiced motion. The sound, metal sliding into place, was small, but it felt like a line drawn in the snow. Here, not farther. Brooke sagged in Mason's arms, her face pale beneath windburn, lips still tinted blue. Her dark hair had come loose from its bun, strands sticking to her temple where blood had dried in a thin rust line. She wasn't heavy, but she carried the weight of urgency. Mason set her down on the couch gently, as if she were made of glass and gilt. The couch was old, the springs complaining like an elderly man, but it was close to the stove, close to life. "Stay with me," Mason said again, his voice rougher than he wanted. He wasn't used to saying things like that out loud. It made them real. Brooke's eyelids fluttered, her eyes tried to focus, storm-gray pupils searching the room like a drowning person searching for air. She inhaled, coughed, and hissed in pain when her ribs protested. Mason's gaze snapped to her shoulder. It sat slightly forward, wrong in a way his old medic training recognized instantly. He moved with careful authority, the kind that came from too many nights where someone bled and there was no time to be scared. He pulled a wool blanket from a chair, the fabric smelling faintly of pine smoke, and wrapped it around Brooke's torso. "No sudden moves," he told her, then to himself, "or we'll make it worse." Titan positioned himself between the couch and the front window, body angled, ears high, eyes fixed on the swirling white beyond the glass. The dog's breathing was fast but controlled. Every now and then his lips pulled back, not in a snarl, but in a silent warning to the world. "I'm watching." Mason moved to his kitchen counter and grabbed a small plastic tub labeled First Aid. The label was faded, the handwriting his own, the letters blocky and impatient. He hadn't used it in months. He'd hoped he wouldn't. He knelt beside the couch and spoke to Brooke the way he'd spoken to Titan, steady, descriptive, gentle. "I'm going to check your head, then your shoulder. I need you awake, okay?" Brooke swallowed. Her throat worked like it was pushing broken glass. "I'm awake," she rasped, and if the words were a lie, they were a brave one. Mason leaned close, shining the flashlight softly across her pupils. They reacted, sluggish but present. He felt a wash of relief that tasted like fear. "Do you know your name?" "Brooke." "Good. Where are you?" "Not dead." The attempt at humor was thin, but it landed. Mason's mouth twitched. "Correct," he said. "Try to keep it that way." He cleaned the cut on her temple with an antiseptic wipe. Brooke flinched, then clenched her jaw. Mason noticed the set of her face, the stubbornness. She wasn't the kind of woman who asked permission to endure pain. He admired it and hated it at the same time. He'd seen too many strong people mistake endurance for invincibility. "You're going to feel dizzy," he said. "If you pass out again, I'll wake you up, not because I'm mean, because concussions can get ugly." Brooke gave a faint nod. Her skin was still cold. Mason stood and crossed to a trunk by the wall, pulled out a pair of dry sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. Ordinich, old, soft, the kind you wore when you stopped caring what anyone thought. He also grabbed a small space heater, set it near the couch, and aimed it away from her face. "I'm not stripping a cop in my living room," he said gruffly, humor used like a shield. "But I'm going to give you options." He draped the clothes over a chair within reach. Brooke's eyes flicked up at him. For a second, pride or embarrassment flashed there, then faded into gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Mason heard the sincerity and looked away fast, as if he might be burned by it. He rummaged in the first aid kit again and found a triangular bandage. He made a sling with quick precision, supporting Brooke's injured arm without yanking the shoulder. Brooke's breathing hitched. She bit down on a sound. "This will stabilize it." Mason said. "We won't reset it tonight. Not in a cabin, not in a storm, not without imaging. We keep it still." Brooke nodded again, sweat forming at her hairline despite the cold. Titan suddenly stiffened, ears rotating toward the door. He sniffed, then made a low, rumbling sound in the back of his throat. Deep. Protective. Mason froze, instinct snapping on like a light. He listened. The stove popped. Wind shoved snow against the siding. Then, maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Titan moved closer to the window, nose pressed near the glass, fogging it with quick breaths. Mason's hand drifted toward the counter where he kept a heavy flashlight that could double as a weapon. He didn't pick it up yet. He waited. Titan's growl faded into silence, but the dog didn't relax. That tension alone was information. Mason lowered his voice. "He's reacting to something," he murmured. Brooke swallowed, eyes widening. "He knows," she said. "He's been on edge since the chase." Mason's gaze sharpened. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Not the poetic version, the facts." Brooke stared at the ceiling for a moment like she was organizing the memory into something that wouldn't break her. "I got a tip," she began, voice thin but steady. "About a property, outside county lines. Dogs disappearing, people pretending it was nothing." Mason watched her face as she spoke. A woman used to being dismissed. A woman who kept pushing anyway. "I went in," Brooke continued. "I filmed what I could. Cages, men, a ledger, and him." She didn't say the name yet, but the way her mouth tightened made it clear the man lived in her head like a stain. "Derek Vance," she added finally, as if naming him brought bile to her throat. Mason's eyes hardened. He'd heard the name once at a gas station in town. Two locals talking in half-words, pretending not to gossip. The tone had been fear disguised as boredom. Brooke's voice dropped. "He saw me, or someone did. We ran. Radio was dead in the storm. And then I fell." Titan, hearing the name, made a short, sharp huff through his nose, as if the word itself smelled bad. Brooke reached under her jacket with her good hand and pulled out a phone. The screen cracked at one corner, the case scuffed. She held it like a holy object. "This has video," she said. "Plates? Faces? The ledger? Enough to start a warrant if I can get it to the right people." Mason took the phone, but didn't unlock it, didn't pry. He simply weighed it in his palm, feeling how small the device was compared to the danger it carried. "Why not call state police?" Mason asked. "Or your chief?" Brooke's laugh was quiet and humorless. "Because I don't know who's clean," she said, "and because Derek isn't alone." She shifted, pain flickering across her face, but she pushed through. "There's a protector, someone who likes to keep things quiet, in town." She didn't say a name yet, and that hesitation told Mason how deep the rot went. "I can't go to the station," Brooke insisted. "If I walk in with this, it disappears. And so do I." Mason felt his spine go cold. He'd been in places where corruption was expected. It had been part of the mission. But he'd also been naive enough once to think small towns were simpler, that they had church picnics and high school football and people who waved. Brooke's words painted a different myth. A town where men with smiles could still sell your life for the price of staying comfortable. Mason leaned back on his heels and studied her. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't exaggerating. Her fear had structure. That was the worst kind. "Okay," Mason said. One word, but it carried a decision. Titan's head turned toward him as if the dog recognized the shift. "We keep you here," Mason continued, voice low. "We warm you up. We keep you awake until I'm satisfied your head injury isn't worsening. Then we figure out a path that doesn't go through town." Brooke's eyes widened. "You don't know me," she said, the protest automatic, almost polite. "You don't owe me anything." Mason let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had room to be. "Yeah," he said. "I've said that to people before. Didn't change the math." He glanced at Titan, at the dog's paw still bleeding faintly, at the way Titan kept shifting to block the window. "Your partner dragged me out into a blizzard," Mason added. "That's not an accident. That's a request." Brooke swallowed, emotion flickering in her eyes. She looked at Titan. Titan moved to her side and pressed his head gently against her hip, a careful touch as if he knew she was hurt. Brooke's good hand trembled as she stroked his neck. "He's never done that with strangers," she whispered, almost to herself. Mason's throat tightened at the tenderness. He was a man who didn't do tenderness easily. Tenderness felt like the start of loss. "Tell me about him," Mason said, not because he needed operational details, but because he could see Brooke fading, the cold and the pain trying to pull her under again. Brooke's voice softened. "Titan was trained out of state. Smart. Too smart. He reads rooms like he has a degree." Her mouth twitched. "He hates my coffee. He'll sniff it and look offended." Mason snorted despite himself. "He's got good judgment," he said. Titan huffed as if agreeing. The brief humor was a match struck in darkness, small but precious. Then Titan stiffened again, staring at the window. A faint sound carried through the storm, something like an engine far away, muffled by snow. Mason's humor vanished. He crossed to the window and wiped fog from the glass. Visibility was terrible. The world was white and moving. But in the distance between the pines, he thought he saw a dim glow. Headlights? Or the storm playing tricks? Titan's growl returned, deeper now. Brooke's eyes sharpened with fear. "They're looking," she said. Mason didn't answer right away. He listened, letting the old parts of himself take over. He remembered nights overseas when the wind carried the wrong kind of silence, when a distant engine meant trouble, when you had to decide whether to hide or fight. He hadn't wanted to live like that again, but the universe didn't ask what he wanted. It asked what he would do. Mason turned from the window and walked to the door, checking the bolt, then the back door latch, then the curtains. He moved with swift, economical precision. "Okay," he said again, but this time the words sounded like a weapon being loaded. He returned to Brooke and crouched, meeting her eyes. "Listen to me," he said. "You stay on this couch. You don't get up unless the cabin is on fire. If I tell you to go to the back room, you do it." Brooke's pride flared, visible for a heartbeat. You can survive," Mason cut in, not unkindly. "That's what you're doing tonight. Surviving is an active job." Brooke's lips parted, then closed. She nodded once, sharp and accepting. Mason's voice lowered, and the confession came out before he could stop it. "I thought I was retired," he said, eyes flicking toward the window where the storm raged. "I thought I'd done my share of running toward bad things." He looked at Titan again, at the dog's unwavering posture, at the way loyalty made a creature braver than pain. Mason's jaw tightened. "But evil doesn't file paperwork," he muttered. "It doesn't respect retirement." Titan's tail thumped once against the floor, like punctuation. Brooke's gaze held Mason's, and in it was something like recognition. Two people who'd learned that peace was rarely free. Outside, the wind kept screaming. Inside, the stove kept breathing. Mason reached for his phone, hesitated, then set it down without dialing. Calling the wrong person could be as dangerous as calling no one. He grabbed a pen and a scrap of paper and wrote down one thing. Hannah Brooks, the name Brooke had mentioned once in passing during earlier conversations at the station, an animal rights attorney Brooke trusted, a woman rumored to be relentless. Mason hadn't met her, but he liked the sound of relentless. He tucked the paper into his jacket pocket like a future lifeline. Brooke's eyelids drooped again. Mason moved closer, placed 2 fingers at her pulse, and watched her breathing. "Stay awake," he said softly, the command now almost gentle. Brooke forced her eyes open. Mason, she whispered, tasting the name like she was anchoring herself to it. Mason blinked. He hadn't introduced himself. Titan must have carried his name the way he carried messages, through instinct, through scent, through some strange canine certainty. Mason let out a slow breath. Yeah, he said. I'm here. Titan settled at the base of the window like a sentry carved from muscle and devotion. Brooke lay under blankets like a wounded knight in a humble keep. Mason stood between them and the storm, feeling the old world trying to pull him back into its teeth. He didn't know yet who in town was compromised. He didn't know how close Derek Vance really was. But he knew one thing with the clarity of a vow. This cabin was small, and the threat was big, and he was done letting fear write the ending. The storm eased just enough to become dangerous. It stopped screaming and started whispering, which was worse because whispers let you hear other things. Engines, boots, the soft click of a door handle testing your luck. Mason Cole stood at the cabin window with a dish towel in his hand, wiping away the fog in a slow, deliberate circle, as if he could scrub the world clean. Outside, the forest still churned with blowing snow, but visibility had improved by a cruel inch. That inch was all a hunter needed. Titan sat at Mason's heel like a living shadow, his 5-year-old Malinois body held in a tense crouch, ears pivoting with the precision of a satellite dish. Brooke Hayes lay on the couch behind them, wrapped in blankets and stubbornness. Her sling held her injured arm tight against her torso. Her cheeks had regained a hint of color, but her eyes still carried the glassy edge of shock. Mason kept her awake, in small ways. Questions, sips of warm broth, a steady hum of conversation. Because hypothermia and head injuries love silence. The cabin smelled like iodine and cedar smoke, like medicine trying to argue with winter. A low, distant sound threaded through the wind. Not thunder, not a branch breaking. A motor. Titan's head snapped toward it, lips pulling back slightly to reveal a flash of teeth. Mason's stomach tightened. He slid the curtain aside a fraction. Through the snow haze, he caught a smear of darkness moving along the tree line, slow and controlled, the way a predator moves when it knows the prey is nearby. Headlights stayed off. That detail alone was a confession. The vehicle rolled into a shallow clearing near the forest's edge and stopped. A black pickup truck, tall on big tires, its paint swallowing the dim light. Mason's jaw clenched. The storm had erased tracks everywhere else, but not here, not completely. The truck's tires bit into fresh powder and left 2 clean, parallel grooves, straight as a drawn blade. The tracks didn't wander like a lost traveler's. They came with purpose. Brooke pushed herself up on one elbow, wincing, eyes narrowing. "That's them," she whispered. She didn't need binoculars. She recognized the shape of threat. Titan gave a low, vibrating growl that seemed to come from deep in his ribs, a sound that didn't ask for permission. Mason held up a hand, palm down, steady. Titan obeyed, but his muscles remained coiled, ready to explode. Mason turned his head slightly toward Brooke. "How many?" he asked. "Last time?" Brooke swallowed, thinking through pain. 3, she said, "maybe 4. Derek doesn't like to do his own dirty work unless it's personal." Mason's eyes stayed on the truck. "And tonight?" "It's personal," he muttered. He moved with a ruthless calm that had once kept men alive. First, he checked Brooke's condition. Her breath steady, her pupils responsive, her hands warm enough to grip a mug. Then he checked his cabin the way a man checked a perimeter, back door latched, windows locked, curtains drawn, lights off. He didn't want the cabin to look lived in. A dark cabin could be empty. An empty cabin might be skipped. He grabbed a small case from beneath the table, 2 compact trail cameras, and a battery pack he used for wildlife monitoring. He'd told himself it was for watching deer. That was half true. It was also for watching the world. Mason opened the front door a crack, letting cold air bite his face, and slipped outside with Titan ghosting at his side. Snow squeaked under Mason's boots. He moved around the cabin, attaching one camera to a pine facing the front steps and another angled toward the clearing, low enough to catch license plates. The cameras were small, black, easy to miss unless you were looking for them, and men like Derek didn't look for evidence. They assumed they owned the night. Mason returned inside and spoke quietly to Brooke, his voice low and firm. "If they come in, you go to the back room," he said. The back room was barely a room, a storage nook with a trap door leading to a crawl space. It wasn't comfortable, but it was hidden. "No hero speeches," Mason added, using humor like a leash. "You're the evidence. You keep breathing." Brooke's expression tightened with frustration, but she nodded. There was steel under her pain. "What's your plan?" she asked. "The plan is not dying," Mason replied. "Everything else is a bonus." He took a coil of rope and a pair of old aluminum bells from a drawer, cheap little jingle bells he'd once tied to his door during a season when bears had been bold. He strung them near the back entrance, subtle enough to be missed by a careless intruder, but loud enough to wake the dead. Titan watched the setup with sharp interest, then padded to the window again, body low, ears forward. Brooke followed his gaze. "They'll search," she said. "They think I fell and died. But Titan got away. That means they're not sure. They'll come to erase questions." Mason's mouth twisted. "Men like that hate uncertainty," he said. "Uncertainty makes them sloppy." He went to the kitchen sink and filled a thermos with hot water, then placed it beside Brooke's couch. He wrapped another blanket around her shoulders and tucked it like a shield. His hand hovered for a moment, unsure whether comfort was allowed. Then he gave her a brief squeeze on the good shoulder, quick and practical. "Stay awake," he repeated, softer this time. Brooke's eyes searched his face. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. Mason's laugh was dry as bark. "I know," he said. "That's the problem." Outside, the truck door opened. The sound carried even through snow. A heavy thud, then another. Titan's growl deepened. Mason killed the stove's visible flame by closing the damper down, leaving only a low ember glow. He didn't want light flickering in the window like a beacon. He turned off the space heater, too. The cabin cooled instantly, but it stayed warmer than death. Mason moved to the corner by the door and picked up a heavy flashlight, the kind with a metal body that could crack bone if necessary. He didn't want violence. He wasn't hungry for it. But he knew what happened when you pretended violence didn't exist. Brooke's breathing quickened as footsteps crunched outside, slow, methodical. A male voice drifted through the storm, smooth, almost amused. "Hello?" The word was a hook wrapped in velvet. Titan bristled. Brooke's face tightened with recognition. "Derek," she mouthed, hatred and fear tangled together. There was a knock on the cabin door. Gentle, polite, like a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. Mason didn't move. Another knock. "Anyone home?" Derek's voice carried. It was the voice of a man who enjoyed pretending he was reasonable, the kind of man who smiled while he crushed you. Mason kept his own breathing slow. He held up 2 fingers toward Brooke. Back room. Brooke hesitated, pain flashing across her face. Titan glanced at her, then at Mason, as if torn between guarding his handler and obeying the new protector. Brooke lowered her good hand to Titan's neck. "Go," she whispered to him, not as dismissal, but as trust. Titan whined softly, then moved to Mason's side, still facing the door. Brooke, grimacing, slipped off the couch and into the back nook, careful, silent, determined not to be heard. Mason's respect for her rose in a bitter wave. She was injured, hunted, and still refused to crumble. The door handle turned. Locked. The knob rattled once, then stopped. A pause, then Derek's voice again, closer. "Come on," he said, still friendly. "We're not here to cause trouble." Mason almost smiled at the audacity. Trouble was literally standing on his porch. Titan's hackles rose, and a low rumble gathered in his chest. Mason placed a hand on Titan's scruff, not restraining, just reminding. "Wait." A different voice spoke outside. Younger, rougher. "Windows got frost on it." "Somebody was in here." Another voice answered, impatient. "Check the back." Mason's shoulders tightened. The bells on the back door suddenly became sacred objects. Then Derek spoke again, and this time his tone sharpened, honey turning to acid. "Open the door," he said, "or we'll open it for you." Mason could imagine him out there, tall, thick-necked, with that shaved head catching whatever light the storm allowed, hands in gloves that had never done honest work. Derek was the kind of man who treated life like a thing you bought. Mason stepped forward and unbolted the door. He opened it only enough to fill the doorway with his body. Cold wind rushed in. Snow swirled around his boots like restless spirits. Derek stood on the porch, flanked by two men. Derek Vance looked exactly like Brooks' description, and worse in person. Mid-40s, tall and heavy, with muscle that wasn't built in a gym so much as built by cruelty. His face was broad, jaw blunt, lips curved in a half-smile that never reached his eyes. A faint scar ran along his right knuckle, and another across his eyebrow, marks of a man familiar with impact. He wore a dark parka and gloves, but his confidence was naked. The two men behind him were younger, leaner, with cold reddened faces and jittery hands, eyes darting like rats. One held a flashlight. The other kept his hands in his pockets like he might be gripping something he didn't want to show. Derek's gaze swept Mason from head to toe. "Evening," Derek said, voice falsely warm. His eyes paused on Titan, who stood just behind Mason's leg, muscles tense, amber eyes fixed on Derek with a hatred older than language. Derek's smile widened slightly at the sight, like he'd spotted a lost tool. "Nice dog," he added. Titan's growl deepened. Mason's voice came out calm, almost bored. "Storm's bad," he said. "You lost?" Derek chuckled, low and dark. "Not lost," he replied. "Looking." He leaned slightly, trying to see past Mason into the cabin. Mason shifted, blocking the view like a door made of bone. Derek's eyes narrowed with annoyance, then he softened again, a performance. "We had a situation," Derek said. "A woman ran through the woods earlier, might have gotten herself hurt. We're worried." The word worried sounded obscene in his mouth. Mason's gaze stayed flat. "Call the police," he said. Derek's smile twitched. "Funny thing," Derek murmured. "Police don't always answer, not in storms." His eyes flicked toward Titan. "And that dog of hers," Derek continued, voice quieter now, more intimate. "He belongs to someone. We'd like him back." Titan made a sharp sound, half growl, half warning, his body shifting forward. Mason's hand tightened on Titan's collar, not to hold him down, but to keep timing perfect. "You're on my property," Mason said. His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried the weight of a man who had once walked into rooms full of armed enemies and decided fear wasn't allowed to speak first. Derek studied him, then laughed as if Mason had told a joke. "Property," Derek repeated. "Sure." He stepped closer, the porch boards creaking under his boots. His breath smelled faintly of tobacco and something metallic. "Here's the deal," Derek said, and the honey was gone now. "You hand her over, and you hand the dog over, and I'll leave this cabin standing." Titan's lips curled, teeth flashing. The dog's body stopped trembling, his fear replaced by a cleaner, colder resolve. Mason felt it through the leash like electricity. Mason's own pulse stayed steady, but his mind clicked through outcomes with brutal clarity. If he lied, Derek might search. If Derek searched, Brooke could be found. If Brooke was found, she'd be silenced. Mason's fingers tightened around the flashlight. He stepped forward into the doorway fully, blocking the cabin like a fortress gate. Snow clung to his jacket, the leather creasing like old armor. The red and black plaid beneath it looked almost ceremonial, like a war banner you didn't raise unless you meant it. Mason's eyes met Derek's, and for the first time Derek's smile faltered. Mason spoke slowly, each word a nail hammered into place. "If you want them," he said, "you step through me first." Derek stared at him for a long moment, and then the smile returned. Not friendly, not amused, but hungry. "All right," Derek murmured. "Now we're talking." The men behind him shifted, and the storm seemed to lean closer, eager to watch what humans did when the masks came off. Morning did not arrive like a blessing. It arrived like an interrogation light, pale, cold, and unimpressed by heroics. The blizzard had eased into a steady snowfall, as if the forest, having taken its drama for the night, now wanted to watch what humans did with the consequences. Mason Cole sat at his kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and a face that looked carved from exhaustion. The worn brown leather jacket still hung on him, creased at the shoulders, the red and black plaid shirt beneath it rumpled from sleeping in short bursts. He hadn't truly slept. He had listened. All night he had listened for boots on his porch, for a door handle turning, for the soft, predatory pause that meant someone was deciding whether to come in. Titan had kept watch too, moving between window and door like a loyal sentry who had no concept of retirement. The Malinois' paw still showed a small split near the pad, scabbed but tender, and his eyes held that fierce, sleepless intelligence that made Mason both grateful and sad. A creature like Titan deserved games and sunlit yards, not war in snow. Brooke Hayes lay on the couch, propped up by pillows, her injured arm secured in a sling Mason had adjusted twice during the night to keep her shoulders stable. Her face had regained color. The bluish tint at her lips had faded into ordinary winter paleness. She looked younger in daylight, not because she was naive, but because pain always stripped people down to their essential selves. The cut on her temple had been cleaned and taped, and her dark brown hair was a tangled halo around her shoulders. Despite everything, her eyes were alert, storm gray, steady, focused. She watched Mason the way a good cop watched a room, not with paranoia, but with attention. "We can't do another night like that," Brooke said softly. Her voice was hoarse, but it carried the firm cadence of someone who had learned that fear didn't deserve to steer. Mason didn't answer immediately. He stared at the coffee as if it might confess a plan. Then he looked at Titan, who was sitting with his chest squared toward the front door, ears rotating at every tick and creak. "He'll come back," Mason said. "Derek, he tested the fence. Now he knows there's a fence." Brooke nodded. "And if we keep hiding, he'll keep trying doors until one opens." Her jaw tightened. "That's what men like him do." Mason leaned back, chair creaking. The cabin was small. Kitchen, living room, back nook, a single bedroom he rarely used. It had never needed to be anything more than a shelter from weather and memory. Now it felt like a bunker in a story that didn't belong to him. He rubbed a hand over his stubble and exhaled a humorless breath. "So what?" he said. "We go to the station and hope the town is suddenly full of saints?" Brooke's eyes flashed. "No," she said quickly. "We go around it." She swallowed, then reached for her phone with her good hand. The device looked more battered than it had the night before, as if it too had been through the crevasse. "We make this loud," she said, "loud enough that Derek can't bury it, loud enough that if I disappear, the whole county looks guilty." Mason's eyebrows rose slightly. "You want to pick a fight with public attention," he said, "in a county where half the people still think Facebook is a medical condition." Brooke's mouth twitched. "Even old men with flip phones watch the news," she replied, "and the people who fund this county, business owners, church donors, tourists, they hate scandal. They hate being embarrassed." She glanced at Titan, who looked back, ears forward. "If we shine a light, the shadows panic." Mason stared at her a long moment, then nodded once. It wasn't agreement born of comfort. It was agreement born of arithmetic. He'd seen darkness before, and he'd learned that darkness didn't fear fists as much as it feared exposure. "Who do you trust?" he asked. Brooke hesitated, then said two names like prayers spoken carefully. "Hannah Brooks. Emily Chen." The first name made Mason's eyes flicker. He remembered scribbling it down, tucking it into his pocket like a lifeline. "Tell me about them," he said. Brooke shifted slightly, pain flickering across her face, then steadied. "Hannah Brooks is an attorney," she began. "Animal cruelty cases, trafficking, organized rings. She's not from here. That's why she's useful." Brooke's tone carried a grudging admiration. "She's mid-30s, tall, lean, like she was built for walking into courtrooms with bad men and not blinking. Blonde hair usually pulled into a severe knot. Skin the color of paper under fluorescent lights because she's always working. She has these sharp blue eyes that make you feel like your lies are getting audited." Brooke breathed in. She grew up on a ranch. Her dad shot a dog once because it was useless. She never forgave him. That's why she fights the way she does. Mason's jaw tightened. A man shooting a dog for being useless felt like the same story as Derek's world, just told with different excuses. "And Emily?" he asked. "Emily Chen is a journalist," Brooke said. "Investigative. She's late 20s, maybe 30. Petite but stubborn. Black hair, straight, usually cut to her shoulders, always in an oversized coat with too many pockets. Brown eyes that look warm until you try to fool her, then they get cold." Brooke almost smiled. Emily lost her brother to an overdose tied to a local trafficking network. The case got buried. She decided she'd never let that happen again. Brooke's gaze hardened. "She's been sniffing around rumors of dogfighting for months. She just needs a solid lead." Titan huffed softly, as if offended by the word rumor. Mason watched Brooke's fingers as she unlocked her phone. They shook a little, not fear, pain, and maybe the weight of what she was about to unleash. "If you call them," Mason said, "you give them my address, my face, my cabin." Brooke met his eyes. "I know," she said, "and you can say no." Mason almost laughed. The absurdity of being offered choice in the middle of a blizzard war. He looked at Titan again. The dog's gaze was steady, and in it Mason saw something he hadn't expected when he moved to the woods. Purpose. Not the violent kind, but the kind that felt like being pulled back into the human world by a leash made of loyalty. Mason set his mug down. "Call," he said, "but do it smart." They began with Hannah. Brooke put the phone on speaker and dialed a number from memory, her thumb moving with practiced speed. The line rang twice, then a woman's voice answered, crisp, awake, controlled. "Brooks," the voice said. It wasn't hello, it was a door opening and demanding a reason. "Hannah, it's Brooke Hayes," Brooke said. "I'm alive. Barely. I need you." There was a pause that lasted half a heartbeat too long. Then Hannah's voice sharpened. "Where are you?" she demanded. "What happened?" Mason watched the stove while Brooke spoke, as if the flame could keep him from hearing how fragile everything was. Brooke summarized fast. Chase, crevasse, Derek Vance, evidence on the phone, a compromised town. Hannah's breathing changed on the other end, quick and restrained. "You're telling me a cop was hunted in a blizzard by a ring operator, and you have video?" Hannah said. "Yes," Brooke replied. "Send it," Hannah commanded. "Now, and don't send it only to me." Hannah's tone became strategic. Cloud backup, multiple accounts. Email it to a burner address I'll text you. If you think the station is compromised, assume your phone carrier isn't safe either. Mason leaned forward. He hadn't expected this level of competence to sound like thunder through a tiny speaker. Hannah continued, voice low. Brooke, if Derek Vance is bold enough to show up at a cabin, he's desperate or protected. Either way, you need a witness trail. I have one, Brooke said, glancing at Mason. Hannah paused. Who is that? Mason heard it then, the question behind her question. Is he safe? Is he an idiot? Is he a hero? Brooke answered. Mason Cole, retired SEAL. He pulled me out. Hannah's voice softened a fraction, not warm, but acknowledging. Mr. Cole, she said through the phone, thank you. You're in this now whether you like it or not. Mason exhaled. I noticed, he muttered. Hannah gave a sound that might have been a laugh if she allowed herself joy. I'm going to file emergency motions, she said. Protective custody request, restraining orders. And I'm calling a state-level contact who doesn't owe this county anything. She paused. Do not go to town. Brooke's eyes closed briefly, relief thin as paper. We won't, she said. After they ended the call, Brooke dialed Emily Chen. This time the answer came with background noise. Typing, a police scanner crackling, a kettle whistling. If this is about the fighting ring rumor, I swear, Emily began, voice quick and slightly annoyed. Then Brooke cut in. Emily, it's Brooke. I'm injured. Derek Vance tried to kill me. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Then Emily's voice changed, focused, urgent. Where are you? Mason listened as Brooke gave careful details without giving a direct address. Only outside Black Pine, in a cabin, storm damage, enough to orient but not expose. Emily asked sharp questions. Do you have proof, names, plates, video? Are you safe? Is Titan with you? Brooke's voice softened at the last one. He is, she said. Titan lifted his head at the sound of his name, tail tapping once. Emily spoke faster. Okay, here's what we do, she said. I publish a teaser first. No location, no details that get you killed, but enough that people start watching. Then we drop the full piece once Hannah has legal moves in motion. Emily's voice held an emotion that sounded like anger polished into purpose. If Derek threatens you again, I want it recorded. Audio, video, anything. Mason rubbed his temple. We have cameras, he said, surprising himself by speaking into the call. Emily's tone softened briefly. Good. Keep them rolling. Then her voice sharpened again. I'm also calling a producer I trust at the regional station. If we can get this into mainstream coverage, Derek's reach gets smaller. When the call ended, the cabin felt different. Not safer. Safer was a lie they couldn't afford. But connected. Like they had thrown a rope out of the woods and finally felt it catch on something solid. Brooke leaned back against the pillows, breathing shallowly through rib pain. Now we wait, she said. Mason shook his head. No, he corrected. Now we prepare. They spent the next hour moving like a quiet storm of their own. Mason repositioned the cameras and checked batteries. He placed the phone evidence into a metal lockbox he used for his old documents, then backed it up to a small laptop with no personal accounts attached. Brooke, wincing, guided him through the files, naming what mattered. Timestamps, faces, audio snippets, the ledger shots. Titan paced, checking each window, occasionally pressing his body against Brooke's leg as if lending her courage by contact. By noon, Brooke's social media notifications began to explode, not because she posted, but because Emily did. A short, stark headline appeared in local feeds. Missing officer hunted in blizzard. K9 found help. The post included no address, no cabin, only the promise of evidence and the name Derek Vance, spoken carefully, like a match struck in a dry barn. Comments poured in: shock, rage, disbelief, prayers, threats. People who'd ignored missing dogs suddenly cared when the story included a cop and a winter storm. Mason watched Brooke scroll, her face tightening with each message. "They're waking up," she whispered. Outside, far beyond the cabin, the county's quiet routines began to crack. And somewhere, Derek Vance would be reading too, realizing the darkness he'd depended on now had eyes. Mason stood at the window again, watching the tree line. Titan's growl rumbled low. Not because someone was there yet, but because the dog understood what humans often forgot. When you light a fire in the dark, you don't just attract help. You also attract whatever hates the light. Dawn came with a thin, merciless light that made everything look honest. Snow lay in clean sheets across the black pine forest, but the air felt tense, as if winter itself was holding its breath to see whether truth could survive the day. Mason Cole stood at the cabin window with his hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold, watching the tree line for movement that wasn't wind. The night before had been a long stretch of vigilance and whisper plans. Brooke's pain measured in shallow breaths, Titan's body a coiled promise at every window, and Mason's mind running through contingencies like a man counting bullets he prayed he wouldn't use. Now the cabin's quiet was different. Not safe, just waiting. Brooke Hayes sat upright on the couch, her sling tightened and her jaw set. Her temple cut had sealed into a thin scab, and the bruising along her ribs had deepened into dark bands under her pale winter skin. Yet her storm-gray eyes were clearer than they'd been since the fall, sharp, present, and unflinching. Titan lay near her feet, not sleeping, merely resting his muscles while his senses stayed wide awake. His sable coat had dried into a rough sheen, and the small wound on his paw looked cleaner, wrapped with a strip of gauze Mason had secured. When Brooke's good hand brushed Titan's neck, the dog leaned into the touch for half a second, then returned his gaze to the window like a soldier refusing comfort until the mission was done. The phone on the table buzzed once, then again. Texts from Hannah Brooks and Emily Chen stacking like dominoes. Hannah's words were clipped and precise. Warrant approved, state task force involved, stay put. Emily's message came with a different energy, a pulse of human anger turned into momentum. It's happening. They're moving now. The cabin, which had felt like a bunker, suddenly felt like the eye of a storm about to break. Mason exhaled and glanced at Brooke. "You ready?" he asked, and the question sounded ridiculous, because nobody was ever ready to watch evil get dragged into daylight. Brooke nodded once. "I'm ready to see it end," she said. They didn't go to town. They didn't go anywhere near the sheriff's office. Instead, they followed Hannah's instructions. Remain in place, keep the evidence chain intact, be available for a statement if asked, and, most importantly, do not become a moving target. Mason set his trail cameras to upload automatically to a small hotspot device he'd rigged from Old Gear, and he saved every clip from Derek's porch encounter in duplicate. The footage was ugly in its simplicity. Derek's voice, polite venom turning into threat. Mason's body filling the doorway like a wall. Titan's low growl vibrating with restrained fury. It wasn't dramatic enough for Hollywood. It was worse. It was real. A little after sunrise, another message came. This one from an unfamiliar number, Hannah's voice, now in text form. Agency team lead is a man named Grant Wheeler. Trust him. That name mattered because it meant Hannah had put a human face to the law, someone accountable, someone outside the county's soft corruption. Mason read it aloud. Brooke repeated the name under her breath like she was committing it to memory. "Grant Wheeler," she said, and there was a faint shift in her posture, the way people straighten when they finally feel a hand reaching down toward them. By late morning, the sounds reached even the cabin, distant, muted by miles of snow and trees, but unmistakable. Helicopter blades, far-off sirens. The forest carried the echoes in thin, trembling threads, and Titan's ears pivoted toward them like radar. He didn't relax, but something in him changed, a tiny easing at the edges, as if he recognized the sound of reinforcements. Brooke closed her eyes briefly and exhaled, slow and controlled. "That's not county," she murmured. "That's state." Mason's phone rang. A voice came through, deep and steady. "Mason Cole?" Mason stiffened. "Speaking." "This is Grant Wheeler," the voice said. "I'm the task force lead on today's warrants. Hannah Brooks gave me your number. I'm not calling to chat. I'm calling because I want your cameras and your statement on record. Also, your cabin footage. We need it." Grant Wheeler sounded like a man who had spent years in rooms where people tried to lie with confidence. He didn't sound young, late 40s, maybe early 50s. The kind of voice that had been weathered by cigarette smoke, too much coffee, and too many nights where someone's life depended on decisions made fast. Mason imagined his face as he spoke, and later he would see it for real. Grant was broad-shouldered and tall, with salt and pepper hair cropped short, and a jawline hardened by a lifetime of saying no. His skin was wind-burned, as if he spent more time in parking lots and raids than behind desks. He had heavy-lidded eyes the color of river stone, calm, assessing, and a thick mustache that made him look like an old-school cop from a different era. But his tone held no nostalgia. He was practical, ruthless with procedure. And that meant he was safe. Mason put the call on speaker. Brooke leaned forward, pain flickering across her face, but her focus unwavering. "Agent Wheeler," Brooke said, "this is Officer Brooke Hayes." There was a pause on the line, then Grant's voice softened just slightly. "Officer," he said, "good to hear you breathing." Brooke's throat tightened. "I have evidence," she said. "Video, plates, ledger images, and physical signs on the dogs I saw. Burn marks, scarring patterns consistent with fighting." "We're already in," Grant replied. "And you were right." That was all he said before he ended the call. But those 4 words, "you were right," landed like a stone in Brooke's chest. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply stared at the wall as if she could see through it to the place where cages waited. Mason watched her, then looked away. He knew that expression. It was the face of someone who'd spent too long being doubted and was now forced to feel the cost of being correct. Hours later, Emily's updates started arriving in bursts, each message a sharper slice of reality. "They're at the warehouse, entry made, multiple dogs found, vets on scene." Then they moved to the ranch property, basement, cages, records. Then, after a pause that lasted long enough to make Mason's knuckles whiten, "Derek is in cuffs." Brooke read the words twice as if her eyes didn't trust them. Titan stood suddenly, pacing to the window, nose pressed against the glass. Mason pulled the curtain a fraction and stared at the snow beyond, as if he expected Derek to appear there anyway, like a villain who didn't believe in endings. "Not here," Mason whispered, half to himself. "Not today." Late afternoon brought a knock at the cabin door. Not the polite, poisonous knock of Derek, but a brisk official rap. Titan's body stiffened. Mason raised a hand to keep him back, then unbolted the door carefully. 2 figures stood outside in heavy winter gear, snow crusted on shoulders and boots. One was Grant Wheeler, in person, bigger than Mason had imagined, his posture radiating control. Beside him stood a woman in a thick parka with the hood down, Hannah Brooks. She looked exactly like Brooke described. Tall and lean, blonde hair yanked into a tight knot, sharp blue eyes that scanned the cabin like they were reading the air for lies. Her face was pale from long hours indoors, but her cheeks were pink from cold. She held a leather folder under one arm like it was an extension of her body. Behind them, a third person hovered near the truck, Emily Chen. She was smaller, bundled in an oversized coat, black hair whipping around her face, eyes bright with exhaustion and purpose. She held a camera bag, and her gloved hands looked stained with ink or coffee or both. Emily didn't step in at first. She looked at Titan as if she recognized him not as a dog, but as a witness. Titan met her gaze, ears forward, and then, unexpectedly, he sat. A perfect, calm sit, the kind that made people trust him without understanding why. Grant spoke first. "We're going to take formal statements," he said, "but before that, I'm going to tell you what you need to know." He glanced at Brooke, then at Mason. The warehouse and the ranch were worse than we expected. Dozens of dogs, some malnourished, some injured, some too far gone. His jaw clenched. We recovered stimulant drugs, training devices, written schedules for fights, financial records, names of buyers, and a ledger with your footage matching dates. Brooke's face didn't change, but her eyes did. They sharpened, then dulled, then sharpened again, as if she were holding back a flood behind glass. "He's going to prison?" she asked. Hannah stepped forward, voice firm. "He's going to trial," she said. "Prison will be the goal, but don't confuse cuffs with victory. He has money, he has allies, and he will try to turn the narrative." She looked at Mason. "That's why your footage matters. It shows intent, threat. It shows a pattern." Emily finally stepped closer, her voice quiet but electric. "I've got the story ready," she said, "but I'm holding details until Hannah clears what's safe. We protect Brooke's location. We protect you, Mason. We protect Titan." She swallowed hard, then added softer, "And we protect the other dogs. People deserve to see what was done, but not in a way that turned suffering into spectacle." Mason nodded once, respect flickering in his tired eyes. "Good," he said. "No circus." They moved inside. Brooke spoke with controlled precision, describing the warehouse, the men, the ledger, Derek's voice. Mason shared the porch footage, the truck tracks, the intimidation. Titan lay at Brooke's feet, still as stone, only his eyes moving. When Grant asked for identification, Brooke gave it without hesitation. When Hannah asked about chain of custody, Mason produced the lockbox and backup drives like a man who'd been preparing for this all his life. Then Grant delivered the final detail, the one that made Brooke's hands go cold. "Derek kept looking at Titan," Grant said, "not like a dog, like a tool, like property." He shook his head, "even in cuffs." Brooke's mouth tightened. She glanced down at Titan. The dog looked back at her, amber eyes clear, and for a moment something in Brooke's expression softened, pain meeting love, fear meeting loyalty. She didn't cry, not yet. She simply placed her hand on Titan's neck and let her palm rest there, steady, grounding. Titan didn't lunge, he didn't bark, he didn't give Derek the satisfaction of being feared. He stayed beside Mason and Brooke, quiet and cold-eyed, like snow that refused to melt for monsters. When the formal statements were done, Hannah slipped a protective order form from her folder and placed it on the table. "This is your next step," she said. "You've survived the storm. Now you survive the paperwork." Emily exhaled a shaky laugh at that, and even Brooke's lips twitched. Humor, thin but alive, proof that they were still human. Mason glanced at the window where snow drifted lazily now, innocent as a lie. He thought of the dogs in cages, of the men who called that business, of Titan, who ran through a blizzard to save a life. The cost of truth was always paid in more than money. It was paid in sleepless nights, bruised ribs, and the knowledge that not everyone would be saved in time. But today, the darkness had been forced into handcuffs. And sometimes, in a world like this, that was as close to a miracle as you got. Spring did not arrive like a trumpet. It arrived like a quiet apology. The snow around Black Pine thinned day by day, shrinking back from porches and pines, revealing the old bruises of the earth, dark soil, broken branches, tire ruts that looked less like nature and more like memory. Mason Cole watched it happen from the same cabin window where he'd once searched for headlights in a blizzard. The worn brown leather jacket still hung on him out of habit, the red and black plaid beneath it still his daily armor, but the way he carried himself had changed. He moved less like a man bracing for impact and more like a man learning to live without flinching. Healing didn't make him softer. It made him steadier. The county had changed too, though it tried to pretend it hadn't. Derek Vance's arrest had cracked something open, and cracks, once made, had a habit of spreading. The task force found ledgers linking names to money and money to silence. A warehouse raid became a second raid, then a third. People who had spent years hiding behind "I didn't know" suddenly remembered details. A network was dragged into light like a creature hauled from a cave, blinking, furious, exposed. Grant Wheeler's team kept moving, methodical, unromantic, and stubborn. Hannah Brooks pressed charges like she was driving nails into the coffin of a lie. Emily Chen's stories kept coming, careful not to sensationalize pain, but relentless about naming it. The public pressure didn't just protect Brooke. It forced the county to look at itself without makeup. Brooke Hayes returned to work on a bright, cold morning that still smelled faintly of snow. She stepped into the station wearing a heavier version of her usual confidence. Her dark hair was cut shorter now, just below her jaw, practical and clean, the kind of haircut a woman got when she'd decided she was done being grabbed by the past. The bruises on her ribs had faded to faint yellow shadows, and her shoulder had healed enough that she could raise her arm again without seeing stars. But the true change wasn't physical. It was in her eyes, storm gray still, but no longer haunted by the question of whether anyone would help if she ran. She had learned two hard truths, that some people would betray you, and some would cross a blizzard for you. Titan had stayed close to her at first, a shadow with amber eyes. The 5-year-old Belgian Malinois, sable coat, athletic frame, scars hidden beneath thickening fur, still startled at sudden loud sounds, still watched doorways as if they might bite. Yet he had changed too. The nervous trembling that once lived in his muscles like a permanent storm began to loosen. He started eating with his head up. He started sleeping without one eye open. And when he did wake from nightmares, he no longer woke alone. Mason didn't return to town the way people expected. He didn't start attending community meetings and giving speeches about courage. He didn't suddenly become the friendly local legend who shook hands at the diner. He did something quieter, and in Mason's world, quiet was sacred. He bought a small, weathered building about 20 minutes from the main road, an old storage shed that had once belonged to a logging outfit. The place was ugly in a way that made it honest. Peeling paint, warped boards, a roof that needed repairs, and a yard that was mostly mud in spring. But Mason looked at it the way a man looked at a second chance. Unpolished, stubborn, and real. He called it Northlight Recovery, though he never said the name with pride, as if pride might jinx the miracle. He built kennels with his own hands, sanding the edges until no frightened animal could cut itself in panic. He installed soft lighting instead of harsh fluorescence because he'd seen how bright lights could feel like interrogation to a traumatized mind. He added sound-dampening panels in one room, a quiet room, he called it, because some dogs needed silence the way broken ribs needed bandages. The place wasn't a rescue exactly, not at first. It was a bridge, a pause between hell and home. Hannah helped with paperwork, because Hannah helped with everything that involved turning chaos into something a judge would respect. She arrived one afternoon in a crisp coat and boots that looked too clean for mud, her blonde hair still pinned tight, her pale skin untouched by sunlight. She stepped out of her car, surveyed Mason's building, then looked at him with those sharp blue eyes. "This is irresponsible," she said. Mason blinked. "Thank you," he replied. Hannah's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I mean it as a compliment," she said. "Most people are responsibly useless." Emily came too, camera bag slung over her shoulder, black hair catching the breeze, cheeks flushed from running on coffee and purpose. She walked the yard slowly, taking in the empty kennels and the newly built fences. "You're building a temple," she said softly, and her voice carried the mythic weight of it, like she could see the invisible altars humans built when they decided to make amends. Mason snorted. "It's a shed," he said. Emily's eyes lifted to him, warm and fierce. "Temples start as sheds," she replied. Brooke visited once her doctor cleared her to drive longer distances. She stepped out of her car in a thick jacket, posture straight, the careful balance of someone whose injuries had taught her respect for gravity. She walked the perimeter with Mason, nodding at the sturdy fences, the quiet room, the soft bedding stacked neatly like offerings. "You're serious," she said. Mason shrugged. "I got tired of watching good dogs get labeled too dangerous when they were really just terrified," he replied. Brooke's gaze drifted to Titan, who stood near the gate, ears forward, scanning the yard. "He was never dangerous," she said. "He was broken." Mason nodded once. "Same difference. To the wrong people," he said. Titan became the heart of the place without anyone officially naming him so. He didn't work right away. Mason didn't force him. He simply let Titan exist in the yard, let him sniff the new kennels, let him claim the space at his own pace. Then one day, the county brought in a dog that had been seized during the later raids, an older pit mix with cloudy eyes and ribs like a ladder, trembling at every human movement. The dog's name on paper was Evidence 14. Mason hated that. A soul wasn't evidence. It was a life. Titan approached the new dog slowly, head low, body angled sideways. Classic canine diplomacy. He didn't rush. He didn't stare. He offered space and calm like a language only the wounded understood. The pit mix flinched at first, then froze, then, astonishingly, sniffed Titan's cheek and didn't retreat. Mason watched from a distance, jaw tight. He felt something in his chest unclench that he hadn't realized was still clenched. Titan, the dog who had once been a shaking plea on Mason's porch, was now a guide, not by force, by example, by surviving. The county's outrage did not stay outrage forever. It settled into something steadier. Donations, volunteer lists, therapy trainer referrals, and quiet apologies written in checks. Northlight Recovery became a place people whispered about with reverence, not because it was famous, but because it was rare. A place where damaged didn't mean disposable. A place where fear was treated like an injury, not a character flaw. Brooke's case grew bigger in the months after Derek's arrest. Names in the ledgers led to other names, and those names led to handcuffs. Not everyone was convicted. Some wriggled away like worms in wet soil, but enough were caught that the network stopped feeling invincible. Brooke testified once, her voice calm, her eyes steady, her words cutting through defense theatrics like cold air. She didn't mention Mason in court for drama. She mentioned him because truth deserved accuracy. She also spoke about Titan, not as a weapon, not as an accessory, but as a partner who chose loyalty when fear would have been understandable. After the trial day, Brooke came to Mason's place again. She stood near the fence and watched Titan with a small, tired smile. "You know," she said, "the media keeps calling him a hero." Mason leaned against the post, arms crossed, looking unimpressed. "He's a dog," Mason said. "Dogs do dog things." Brooke's smile widened. "Right," she replied. And humans do human things, like needing a dog to remind them what loyalty looks like. Mason huffed a laugh despite himself. Humor, small, necessary, was how survivors proved they were still alive. One morning, late winter's last breath lingered in the shade, but the sun had begun to learn mercy. A thin crust of snow covered the yard, sparkling like scattered salt. Titan ran, truly ran for the first time without checking every shadow. He chased a battered tennis ball Mason had thrown with a lazy flick of his wrist. Titan's paws kicked up powder, his body a clean arc of muscle and joy. His tail wasn't tucked. It was a flag. He skidded, spun, pounced, then sprinted again, leaving wild, looping tracks that looked like laughter scribbled on white paper. Mason watched, hands in his jacket pockets, expression trying to stay stoic and failing. He looked like a man pretending not to believe in miracles while standing in the middle of one. Titan bounded toward him, then slowed at the last second. The dog didn't jump. He didn't demand. He simply pressed his head against Mason's thigh, firm and warm, as if saying, "I came back. I always come back." Mason's hand lowered without thinking, fingers sinking into Titan's fur. The scars beneath were still there. They always would be. But the scars no longer had the last word. Mason looked out over the yard, over the kennels, over the quiet room, over the simple place he had built, not to be admired, but to make amends. The forest beyond the fence stood tall and indifferent, a mythic witness to everything humans did: cruelty, courage, betrayal, redemption. Mason exhaled slowly, his breath visible for a moment, then gone. "All right," he murmured, half a joke, half a vow. "You win. We're not lost anymore." Titan's ears flicked, as if he understood exactly. And somewhere inside that simple truth lived the real ending. Sometimes the wilderness wasn't where people disappeared. Sometimes it was where they were found, by a dog, by a promise, by the kind of love that didn't ask permission from the past. In the end, the miracle wasn't the raid, or the handcuffs, or even the snow finally letting go of the trees. The miracle was smaller, so small most people would miss it if they weren't looking, a wounded heart choosing to trust again. A canine who once shook like a candle in the wind, returning to place his head against a man's leg, quietly saying, "I'm safe." A woman who refused to disappear. A man who thought his good days were behind him, discovering that God still writes new chapters for the tired. Sometimes God doesn't send lightning. Sometimes He sends a knock in the storm, a paw print that leads you to someone you weren't planning to save, until you realize they're saving you too. And maybe that's the gentlest kind of grace, not a life without scars, but a life where scars stop being prisons and start being proof. Proof that love can outlast cruelty. Proof that courage can be ordinary. Proof that even when the world feels loud and cold, heaven can still feel close, right there, in a warm room, in a steady breath, in a simple, "Stay with me." So when tomorrow feels heavy, when bills pile up, when loneliness sits at the table, when the news is a blizzard of bad things, remember this: God often places miracles in the everyday, in the choice to be kind when nobody is watching, in the decision to speak truth even when it costs you sleep, in the patience to help someone heal slowly, one small step at a time. If you've ever felt broken, or if you've ever loved someone who is, let this story be a reminder: you are not forgotten, not by God, not by the one who counts every tear, even the ones you refuse to let fall until you're finally safe. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and what moment hit you the hardest. And if you want more stories of loyalty, redemption, and quiet miracles, please subscribe to the channel and stay with us. May God bless you and your family. May He place peace in your home, strength in your weary places, and light on the path ahead. Amen.